Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another review. And today is another series review, and this one has been coming for a very long time. The X-Men animated series. From time travel to the Dark Phoenix, to the fall of Charles Xavier himself, the X-Men has been one of the greatest, if not the greatest, comic books and associated films and media I have ever had the fortune to read and learn about. It is so rich with so many different villains, from Mr. Sinister to the future, from an alien who controls technology and puts people and contestants on a TV show to compete against themselves, to a town full of mutants who are isolated from the world itself, to futures never lived and never seen, but always constantly coming back on themselves. And not to mention the most fiercest of them all, Apocalypse, the first mutant. Each and every single one of these stories, as you progress through the X-Men series, gives you a little bit of foundation, a little bit of an idea of where the mutant struggle goes. We start off in the series learning the backstories of our fellow X-Men and how they came to be part of the X-Men as a whole. Charles Xavier recruits many of them, as it's shown in the film, over tragedies and short-lived love lives of their lives. The most esteemed, most divided X-Men always seem to be between Cyclops, Logan, and Jean, along with many of the other X-Men such as Rogue, who literally cannot physically touch someone without killing them. Remy LeBeau, the Gambit, an absolute legend in the making. The kind of legend who reminds you of Robin Hood most of the time. The Beast, a poet, a quotist, the Shakespeare of this series, constantly reminding people their values through poetry. But amongst them all, you have people such as Morph and Magneto and most other characters surrounding the X-Men, even Moira from Scotland, all have their part to play in Charles Xavier's life. And as we get towards the end of the X-Men series, which we just finished, we often find that there are little elements and little things we still didn't quite know about the Professor. For instance, James Xavier knew Mr. Sinister before he became Sinister. Apparently he used to be called Essex. Magneto's life was always twisted and turned, and in one story, we finally got to see in the X-Men Magneto meeting his children, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Logan constantly spends most of this series and each series conflicting whether his values and morals stand on the same values and morals as the X-Men. He often sees both sides of the story, and you can understand why. The idea of him disbelieving in other mutants' beliefs is absolutely out of the picture. Logan sees things from a point of view of a man who was fitted with vibranium armor, skeleton, and being pushed through the limits of how far he can go without people hating him. One of my favourite stories recently has got to be the story with Storm. Storm is tricked by a guy from another world into marrying him and then trying to go to his world and control and dictate the people. Storm doesn't realise this at first, but Logan, Cyclops, and Jubilee start to pick up on what's going wrong. One of my favourite lines from Gambit has got to be between him and his relationship with Cher, aka Rogue. Him and Rogue constantly have a bicker over Rogue's powers as she believes she can't control them. And in one line he says, "In the Earth, no? Essentially a joke playing on the fact that Rogue is always so scared of touching people, and his version is, "But I love you, Cher." Beast is very interesting in this whole series because there's an episode in the very early part of this whole animation series in which Beast gets locked up pretty much for being a mutant. And he does the Martin Luther King thing, and he decides to sit in his cell and wait to be freed. Logan and the rest of the X-Men never believe he's ever going to be freed. They believe the courts are against him, that they dislike mutants. They want to treat them as lesser than humans. And Logan breaks in, tries to save Beast, and Beast just simply says, "Let it be." Charles Xavier, as I've previously mentioned already on this video, he has a very complicated relationship with mutants. And one thing that we learned very recently in the end of this series, as I was getting towards it, is I didn't realize, but Charles himself, even though he had mutant powers, didn't necessarily hang around with a lot of mutants as a youngster. This is most likely due to the fact that a lot of his mutants' powers were dulled down as a child. He was taught to believe that essentially he was just a normal human being, just with a lot of headaches. And it's not until people like Bishop and Logan go back in time to try and save the world that suddenly it dawns on him he's not the only individual struggling in the world, and he needs to be there when they need the help the most. If any part of his timeline is messed up, whether he doesn't become the head of the Academy for Mutants, or whether he doesn't just in general make a place for them to feel at home, the whole timeline is kaput, and it will just lead to war. Talking of war, as you get to the very end with the last one I just watched, The Graduation, Charles Xavier finally moves on from his celestial plane. He kind of dies, but then he goes off with Lilandra and goes off and lives another life there. But he kind of leaves behind this legacy of his X-Men, and he just expects them to live by the values that he himself has tried to teach them over the years. Now, this is not to say that Charles hasn't had his own flaws. In many parts of this series, it has been shown a little bit more, I would say, than the movies. The movies often show Charles in one light or trying to play with people's heads. And this series is no different from that. The idea that Charles Xavier is exempt from being a villain or any such or manipulating people is completely wrong. Even Magneto points it out. Charles does what he does because he cares, but sometimes him caring makes him make the most irrational choices. The amount of mutants that we learn about in this series, or even in the films, where Charles's version of helping them isn't necessarily the easiest or the most understandable way. To a lot of these mutants, they're scared, they're afraid of their life, and they will do anything in their power to put things out of mind. And by him constantly nagging at them, it does push some of them further away and pushes them into gangs, into groups, into multitudes of different factions. And this is where a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the people who start to believe in Magneto's word and call Magneto the savior happens. Not necessarily because they disbelieve in the X-Men, but they are afraid and have been taught over time that becoming an X-Man can either do one or two things. It can cause you to die, because a lot of them get sent out on missions and not a lot of them come back. It can cause you to be traumatized, and most importantly, it just seems to a lot of mutants that it's not the safest way of living. Logan, however's relationship has always been with the X-Men very rocky, on the basis that we see him go to Japan, we see him go to a lot of other places, and over the stretch of stuff, what hurt Logan the most, I would say, at the beginning of this series, is his relationship with Jean. Jean Grey is an absolutely outstanding mutant, but her relationship with a lot of the mutants becomes very complicated. And in the beginning of this series, Logan's led on quite a lot, and eventually it gets to the point where Logan just keeps running away from home. He starts to become the lost little boy who's looking for somewhere to stay, and he just doesn't feel safe. Now, of course, to help with this, he has people like Jubilee and the Beast and Rogue and Gambit, but there's only so much each of these individuals can do. And another complicated part of Logan's life, which he's experienced in this, isn't just the fact of the time when he gets the adamantium skeleton, but also the traumatizing part of his life when he looks back at things such as, well, the one time he teamed up with Captain America back in the war. There's a story I was watching recently in which Captain America and him team up, and essentially they're both looking for a spy. They try to save a doctor, and it turns out the doctor was the spy the whole time, but was kind of working on both sides. He was helping the Red Skull. And so Logan ends the story originally believing that the doctor was a absolute was up the creek and was just a traitor in general, only to learn off of his daughter that he was a double spy and actually quite a bit of a war hero. Gambit is a bit of a swamp rat. It's just true what Rogue says. He comes from a swamp, but he is constantly trying to save his own people from doing stupid mistakes. Rogue comes from a town in which, as soon as her father found out that she had powers, he completely disowned her. Cyclops was in a sticky situation because of heat vision. Jean has always had it very hard because she can't help but read into people's minds, the same as Xavier. Storm was always manipulated as a kid, became a little bit of a thief. One of the most interesting characters, I've got to say, in this whole X-Men series was definitely Morph. Morph is a shapeshifter who can be anything and any person. Morph is very similar in a way to Mystique. Talking of Mystique, Mystique and Nightcrawler appear in this series as well. And I like that we finally get a bit of acknowledgement that Nightcrawler, Rogue, and Mystique are all linked in some way. Mystique in one story tries to give up her own children to save her own life out of absolute self-preservation. But this, of course, backfires, and luckily her son forgives her, no matter what she's done. So overall, what do I give the X-Men animated series? Well, it's a solid story. The only backlog on this is the animation style. Don't get me wrong, Marvel Studios done an absolutely incredible job with this animation. I remember watching it as a kid. I had to watch it recently to remind myself from series 1 to the modern series to see where it goes. But it does let it down a little bit when you think you have like 4 seasons of absolutely stunning VFX, and then you get to the last season, season 5, and all of a sudden it keeps changing. It does make it a bit distracting. Minus that, though, the stories themselves set away exactly how brilliant the artwork was and the storytelling was. And for that reason, I have to give the X-Men animated series a solid 8 out of 10. Now, of course, before I end this video, I just want to point out this is not going to be the final X-Men overall animation review. There is another review planned very soon, which will be the X-Men 97 review. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But for now, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.